Hey guys, thanks for checking out the podcast today. Today I'm going to be speaking with Weldon Green. He is an esports psychology trainer, an expert in esports performance and mental performance in general. He comes from a background of traditional sport, but he is most well known for his role in several championship wins in League of Legends and his expertise in esports performance. Really enjoyed speaking with him. We are going to talk about the difference between esports and traditional sports in this podcast, as well as the different factors in esports performance, the anthropological understanding of sport, the role sport plays in human society, and how esports fits into that, and how esports fits into the future. We had a really, really interesting conversation, and I really hope that you enjoy it. I want to thank Weldon for coming on the podcast, and without further ado, I give you Weldon Green. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Synthetic Native Podcast. I'm here with Weldon Green, aka Mind Games Weldon. And I don't know that I could do you justice trying to summarize what you do, Weldon, so just go ahead and tell the people out there what you do.
Yeah, it's hard to summarize, but because most people want to say he coaches esport, and then everybody says what? But essentially, I'm an esport coach, and I came at the angle from the sports psychology angle. So I got my master's degree in sport and exercise psychology. Actually, my master's of science in sport sciences. With a focus in sport and exercise psychology. And then I started doing mindset work with teams. So in sports psychology, it's separated between two different fields. One is exercise psychology, which is trying to motivate people to, move around and be healthy. And the other one is sports psychology, which is focused on the psychology of sport. And then there's two realms within that, right? There's the people who focus on the elite performance and what is it that allows humans to kind of peak out and achieve something that no other human has, or to operate at the top level of what humans are capable of doing. And then there's the part of the field that focuses on how it is that we as society use sport, youth development through sport, how we develop social and emotional skills and transferable skills through sport. So I'm interested in both those things. I'm interested in how esport can turn into a societal vehicle with which we can then, put our kids in these programs, and they'll come out the other end, instead of having wasted a couple of years of their life playing video games, maybe they'll come out with competitive skills or social and emotional skills that are developed in the competitive arena, just like in traditional sport. I mean, albeit they won't have a lot of the aerobic, training that goes along with running around on a soccer field, but there's hope there for the competitive aspects. And then on the other hand, what I do is I do day to day, mostly I just do training with elite esport athletes to help them be 1% better so that they can win a tournament, and so far pretty successfully, I would say.
I actually have a couple of questions about the relationship between sport and esport, and I guess kind of right off the bat, is it fair to compare esports and sports? Why is that a fair comparison? It's sort of like, is chess a sport? I think people think of these things kind of as being very, very different.
Right. So you can look at it from the anthropological angle, like looking at it culturally, and say, okay, do we define sport by what it is that culture says is sport? In which case, esport makes a strong case, because we essentially use sport throughout the years as either man versus nature or man versus man. And we accepted these ways of competing on a cultural level. So it used to be, you'd feed people to lions and that was a sport. Well, nowadays we wouldn't consider feeding people to lions a sport. We'd say that's barbaric. In a similar way, right now we watch people drive around tracks on, in gas powered vehicles, burning fossil fuels, hurting hurting the atmosphere, and then like possibly maiming and killing themselves. And it could be in 100 years, we see that as incredibly barbaric, and we prefer to drive electric cars around tracks from a drone seat, and do our, Formula One racing kind of like from a safe distance without risking life and limb. And in the same way, you can say culturally that sport moves and is defined by what it is that people like pay attention to and celebrate as a competition. On the other hand, if you look at it neurologically, I think for me, it's really easy to differentiate between more game style stuff and more sports style stuff. So I hear you on the chess thing, and I would compare that to a number of different esports such as Hearthstone or these card games, because they involve strategy and it's 100% mental and probabilistic. And, but the sports that I coach, the esports that I coach, so these are League of Legends and Overwatch and CSGO and these kind of like reflex-based sports, you can't study it and get better. It's not possible. In chess and in Hearthstone, in competitive games, so we call these competitive games, right? The kind of things that are just purely mental. You can study it, you can get better. You can logic out things and you can improve, and you can like test things and you can flashcard yourself. But in sport, I see the differentiating line as something that needs to be trained by volume. You can't just memorize it. Like you can't just study it and learn it. It doesn't matter how many times you look at a piece of piano paper and listen to the piece. You can't play it unless you train the muscles and the reflexes to actually perform it. And that is true with sport and with these like artistic crafts and with esport. It doesn't matter how much you learn about League of Legends. You can't do it unless you put 12 hours a day in, and your training efficiency and your way of training your neuromuscular system is better than your opponent. You train it through volume and intensity the same way you train a sport. So whether you're coordinating your foot to hit a soccer ball at like the most precise angle possible to land a 40-yard shot into the goal, or whether you are training your eyes to see a specific pattern and then instantly react with a certain coordination of the fingers, like that's the same system you're training. So for me, I do the same work, whether I'm training a footballer or whether I'm training a League of Legendser. But I would do different work if I were training a chess player or a card, like an online card game player. So for me, that's where the line is. And so I push esports. I mean, I think esports is an encompassing term, meaning all these digital media, but that's where it's different for me.
Okay. So many questions around this, but so first of all, I wonder if it's maybe simplistically you could put like football on one end and then like Magic the Gathering on the other end, and maybe League of Legends in the middle. I wonder how.
No, I would say there's a split. If you look at, for example, Alan Gutman is a sport anthropologist who has a theory that is applied to. There's a number of leading theorists in anthropology, sport anthropology, that talk about what the definition of sport is. Alan Gutman is one of them, and he has a book called From Ritual to Record, which you guys should check out if you're interested in this discussion. And he delineates the maturation of modern sport, and at the end, he separates these competitive man versus man like into two classifications, one being essentially sports and one being competitive games, things like Monopoly and chess and checkers. So for me, Hearthstone and these like online card games, maybe, or the ones that aren't based on reflex, are in the competitive games category. And then you have the sports category where League of Legends is on one end and football's on the other. So I don't know.
Would you say that League of Legends, maybe has some elements of the competitive games stuff in it?
Well, certainly there's because the games are so complex, the level of complexity in the strategy is monumental compared to traditional sport. I mean, if you compare the strategy of football to League of Legends, it's not even close, right? So because they're able to construct these fantasy worlds, they can make the games incredibly complex. But at the base level, what you're still training is like a subconscious automatic reaction.
Yeah.
And so everything in the game at the top end is powered by a sport reflex. And that sport reflex is the same sport reflex that people use in a traditional sport. So like no matter how much raw strategy data there's no time to think about it. And so everybody who plays League of Legends is limited by the same amount of how much data can you pack into your automatic reflexes system as a footballer would be.
That's interesting because I think there seems to be a correlation between popularity. Like I think people really like watching these sort of raw, like physical feats in a way. Like I think the most popular esports are these games like LoL, CS:GO, Overwatch. They are not, Magic the Gathering and Hearthstone. Not saying those games aren't popular, but and I'm also not backing that up with data.
It's true if you look at the data too. I mean, League of Legends, the last Worlds was watched by 80 million people live. And if you look at Hearthstone, like I don't even think they've cracked 1 million on any event. And it's absolutely true what you say. When we watch, we love to celebrate the feats of people who are doing spectacular things that take spectacular effort over the years of applied effort. And when it's something that nobody can just walk in and do, that we recognize that it takes, blood, sweat, and tears, then it's more kind of celebrated. I'll give you an example of an early Hearthstone tournament where there was a journalist who was in his late 30s, and he was going to the tournament, and he was going to the tournament to cover it. And he got there, and he was like, why? He was thinking to himself, he was like, I've been playing competitive card games for 20 years, because he started when he was younger, and he'd been playing Magic the Gathering for decades, and he had a massive set of skills, of strategic knowledge and skills at his disposal that were completely transferable, because he was playing a game, right? He wasn't playing a quote unquote esport. Well, okay, he was playing an esport, but not like, the ones that are driven by muscular reaction. So he said, why am I covering all these 16 and 18-year-olds playing this stupid card game and like pretending they're esports stars? And he enrolled in the tournament and he got second place, just off the back of his knowledge and his strategy and his composure and all of his transferable skills from other card games. That's completely impossible in a sport where you train your reflexes. Like you could know all of that stuff, and then you walk on the field and you'd play like a moron who's just picked up the game. Even knowing all the mistakes you're making, you wouldn't be able to not make them, because like I said, it's reflex based. So I think that's what we're celebrating, right? We're celebrating the fact that you have to put in the time or you don't get the results.
Okay. That makes sense. I just think that there are a lot of those sort of game elements, like information asymmetry and things like that in there. But yeah, I think that what you said makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, there's a ton of them.
Yeah,
but they have to be kind of. I think that's the beauty of coaching League of Legends is like I was able to become to lend my voice to the strategic aspects of the game based on my knowledge of game theory and my understanding of how it is that these games should be played, in terms of like, where should the power dynamics play out? Should you be the aggressor or the defender? Just on basic principles of games that apply, because there's there is so many strategic elements that are open to the interpretation yet, that we just haven't even figured out yet the best way to play these games.
When you're training when you're training players, how much are you just trying to embed heuristics in them so that they don't have to think while they're playing?
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's like 100% of where my success comes from, I would say.
Wow. Okay. So
like I think that there are I think there are a number of other trainers that are doing the sports psychology side, which is like choking and tilting and handling emotions and training more efficiently. But I think that the reason that I've won 4 championships is because I go in and I say, okay, let's do all of those things, and also let's talk about how we can 80-20 this and pick the most important thing that's going to lose you the most important match, and like make sure that those habits don't get bred into your play by sloppy training. And to do that, we have to talk about what your habits are and how you train and what you focus on, and try to keep this stuff super automatic and super clean, and really drill in the basics every day.
Yeah. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about building rosters. And I don't know to what extent you've been involved with this before, maybe very involved, maybe not as much as I think. But, first off, how do you build rosters in esports?
Yeah. So my involvement is 0. Okay. I haven't built any rosters. But
you're about helping people once they've built the roster.
Yeah. More get hired by Well, after they build the roster and they think that now their job is done and they're like, yay, now my roster is going to go win. And then they go fall flat on their face. And then they call the fire department, AKA me. I wish that they would, I wish they would involve me sooner. I wish they would call me and help them. I mean, the NFL only recently, if you're listening in Europe, that's the National Football League in America, only recently started bringing sports psychology trainers and also clinical psychologists into their recruitment process and like screening people before they would come onto a team to figure out if they have, a performance framework at all and what the strengths and weaknesses are. And sure, I wish that people would do that in esport now, because it's such a mental sport. Compared to like if you're a little bit mentally weak on the basketball court, if you're 6'5" and you have the reflexes and the strength, then they can train the mental aspect up pretty quick. But in esports, like your mind is almost all of what you're relying on. So after the roster's built, or what they're taking into account when they build rosters is most purely it's pretty results based. It's just kind of like scouting around. There's a number of different scouts who kind of try to find people on the ladder. And luckily in all the major esports, there are global ladders and these things are pretty objective. So you just go to the ladder and you take the top people and find the ones who you can contact and scout them out.
I think I forgot to ask this specifically earlier, but it's plays into exactly what we were talking about. Is how does physical fitness play into esports? Into, do you see a correlation between fit esports players and their performance?
Yeah, it's more about endurance. So like I said, this whole game is based on volume of training. The more that you train, the more that you can, because the game is endless in terms of its complexity. In football and in soccer, you're limited by how much you can train by your physical body. And the same is true in esport. If you look at the first generation 7-8 years ago of esport athletes in League of Legends and in CSGO, this would be more like 10-15 years ago. You would see a lot more of what you'd expect from a gamer. There were a lot more overweight kids. They were young. They were kind of like looking like they were in a basement all day long, a little round on the edges. Clearly they were gamers. If you look at League of Legends now and you see everybody walk out on stage in a North American or European tournament, specifically North America is probably the most developed here. It just looks like 5 athletes or 10 athletes if you look at both teams, because what happened was teams were training 6 hours a day. And then there were people underneath them who were hungry and wanted to beat them. So they started training 8 hours a day. And then there were people under them who wanted to beat them. And then they started training 10, 12 hours a day. And so if you wanted to be a pro and you wanted to stay in the scene, you had to start training 12 plus hours a day. And you can't do that unless you're actually an athlete. Like, it's just impossible if you eat unhealthily and if you don't go to the gym and if you aren't aerobically fit to have your mind be actively learning all of that time. I guess you could sit down at the computer and grind it out, but you wouldn't be engaged. You wouldn't have the focus to pull it off. So now I hardly know any single League of Legends athlete that does not hit the gym like a minimum of 5 times a week and isn't aerobically and physically fit and doesn't have like a very strict diet in terms of their own approach to food. And of course, I'm not talking like Olympic levels here. Not by a stretch. They just need to be fit for esport, but they're all understanding the importance of the endurance that they need to just make a go at it the rest of the day.
Yeah. I mean, there's kind of like an 80-20 thing here where you don't need to be Olympically fit to get the benefits that you really want. Like, you just need to be more fit and you need to be fit. You need to, like, I guess this is a good question. Do you focus more on cardio, or do you focus on lifting? Have you come up with these sort of fitness plans for players before?
So I asked a research expert here in Finland who's researching high intensity interval training and its cognitive effects. So, for example, looking at academic performance and working memory and things like that. And he's more or less an expert on physical activity and its effects on the brain. And so I was saying, let's say you're one of these esport athletes. What would you do? What physical activity would you do that would be most beneficial to learning, to becoming better at the video game? When would you do it and how much would you do it? And he thought about it for a while, and he said, we have zero research on this. But in my opinion, looking at all of my past research and the experience and the knowledge that I have of what's going on here, you should do something that involves your arms and your hands in a very technical way that requires intense concentration. And you should do it after your training, within like the next 4 hours after your training, and you should do enough to kind of like make your heart get an exercise. And so he recommended things like juggling, like rowing, things that you would do with your arm, maybe yoga, where you would do complex movements with your arms and you're coordinating your body. He said basically what we see is that when you're trying to cement neuromuscular learning, so what you're trying to do is you train all day, and what you're doing is you're rewiring neurons in your motor cortex, and you're kind of stealing neurons from nearby areas in the visual processing part of your brain, and you're trying to like build these pathways that are going to help you have a more accurate, faster, better reflex to what you see, and then coordinating your hands and your muscles and your hands and your fingers to like do that on the keyboard. So afterwards, if you do a physical activity that involves those parts of the brain, you get like tons of blood flow there. You're activating those neurons. He said that's what they see in terms of the results of their coordination and their learning, and their working memory improvement.
Yeah. So train esports, and then train something else that involves your like sort of hand-eye coordination.
Exactly.
Yeah. I wonder if jujitsu. I just started doing jujitsu
because I think that those kinds of martial arts would be perfect for it. I mean, you're trying to dodge a punch, right? So, I mean, not jujitsu, but
yeah, no, but something like that, Muay Thai, whatever. Okay, this is kind of on a different note, but how? I don't know if you've seen this or if you even feel comfortable answering this, but how does money affect people? Have you ever seen somebody, start to really get the check, and then it negatively affected or positively affected their performance?
I actually had an investor ask me this. He said, should I offer a bonus to the team to win this tournament? So I don't like to give answers that I don't know the answer to, so or that I'm just spouting out, right? So I went and I just searched every single research article in sport management that I could find that had been done on salary and compensation and how it affects motivation. And what I found was, generally speaking, that it's the disparity of salary that will start to affect people negatively. And as long as people are being compensated what they think or perceive is appropriate for their effort level, then it becomes an irrelevant factor. So I think that money is like, as long as the money is there and it's a suitable amount and they're not getting underpaid compared to somebody that they think they're better than, then it won't affect them negatively. And then as far as like a positive motivation, I think it doesn't work well enough in sport to matter, because sport is such a long game and you need that day in, day out concentration and discipline, that it has to be like it. You could maybe make an argument for that mattering if you're looking at like the top 10% performers or top 20% performers. But in elite sport, you're looking at, for example, if you look at the NBA, it's 0.02% of all basketball players are like at the professional level. And if you look at League of Legends, 0.002% of all players in the player base are at the elite level. So it's an even harsher achievement. And you just have to be powered by ambition and there's literally no way to have an external motivator that is strong enough to like make you get good enough to beat these kids and these players. There's nothing you can do if you're externally motivated compared to their internal motivation. So it's all ambition.
Wow. So it's incredibly internally just driven. What are some of like lesser known things that could throw someone off their game besides, I mean, I guess, staying up too late, fatigue, just bad habits. We talked about nutrition. Is there anything else that's particularly interesting that you can think of?
I think like life satisfaction. I think that's the funniest one that I run into. Like, people get a girlfriend and they get a little self-esteem and they're like, oh, like I don't need to win the world championship for somebody to love me. And they just like their ambition just dies. They found somebody who likes them and who loves them. And let's say their career was built on a sense of like like a bad sense of perfectionism and a desire to try to find connection with other people, online. And then they find that love and they really connect, and then they're just done, their career is over because they just can't put in the hours anymore because they don't care. So happiness, I would say, is
you need unhappy players, is what you're saying.
No, it's like if you're building up your ambition on a solid foundation that is like healthy, right? Then joy is a part of that. Yeah. But I would argue that in sport, and especially at the elite level, and in esport, of course, too, there's a lot of dysfunction, and there's a lot of people who are at the top because they were unhappy with something in their life, and they were driven there seeking meaning. So if they find meaning in something else, then their ambition is tied to that seeking. Then it just dies, and it's a really funny thing to watch because you don't ever feel bad for them. Mm-hmm. They're like more whole than they were before, but their teammates look around like, what the heck just happened? We had this really driven guy who's like pushing us all the time, and then all of a sudden he like meets a girl. And or like he makes up with his mom and his family, or he starts making money on content. Let's say he starts streaming. And he realizes he loves entertainment, and then that's it. It's just they just evaporate. Their whole personality changes overnight.
Yeah. Do you see at all? I guess this is probably parallel to, I guess, quote unquote normal sports or just sports. Do you see people burning out quickly and then having trouble finding a life doing something else?
Yeah. I can think of a number of cases. I'm not sure which story to tell, but maybe you can elaborate.
Well, I guess first of all, this is something I don't know that might help illuminate things. Like, how does the age range of players in esports compare to traditional sports? Like, when do people get? It seems like people get out earlier in esports, which might actually be, I don't know, counterintuitive.
The problem is that it's counterintuitive, right? Because technically you should be able to do esport longer than almost any traditional sport because it involves so much less of the body and you can recover so much more. The problem is because it doesn't involve the body, you can train it more. And because it's a muscular sport, it's not like chess where you can master it and then you don't need to train ever, right? You can bring, I'm sure the grandmasters don't train chess 12 hours a day. I'm sure that they train it, 2 or 3 or 4 hours a day and they just kind of coast on their mastery. Mm-hmm. Well, that doesn't work in football. Like, you can't get good at football and then just like stop training and bring down your training and expect to stay competitive. And it doesn't work in esport. So imagine that you're an 18-year-old and you're training, 12, 14 hours of video games a day, no problem, because you're in between, you're in the summer between high school and college. But if you imagine that you're like a 35-year-old with 2 kids and a wife and a house and you want to mow the lawn and you're like, well, can't do that because I have to play video games 12 hours today.
Right.
They just can't keep up with the volume. So until we figure that out, until there's like, well, we're not going to figure it out. Like, I think it's always going to be a young man's game. And then the esports, quote unquote esports, that are non-physical. So like the card games, the Magic the Gatherings, the computer games where you have time to think and it's all based on strategy. I think we'll see like very old competitors succeeding in those.
Okay. On that note, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask this with the sort of recent controversy in Overwatch, at least. I had no idea what it's like in other games, but I noticed you said young man sport. And why are there not more women in esports? And you can punt on this question if you don't want to answer it.
No, I think that I think that everybody looking for the smoking gun is looking at a system, right? And the system involves a lot of different factors then you're not going to solve it with one solution, right? It's going to be a concerted effort. So for one thing, there's just fewer women who are going to try. like physical gender differences, which you find in the average population, and the extremes. When you go to the extreme levels, these statistical anomalies are like much more flagrant, right? They're just they accent the edges of the outliers like much more. You see that in terms of violence and in terms of like competitiveness and in a lot of other things that are driven by testosterone levels, to be honest. But that doesn't mean that there are not a number of like women who are capable of playing just as well and better than all of the men out there. There's just a smaller number of them overall, let's say in the general population. And part of that is due to the difference in gender, right? But I would say most of that is due with the fact that a disproportionate number of men play the games that are esports compared to women who play the games that are esports. And that's not to say that women don't play games. It's just that they're playing different games right now. And that's due to a lot of different factors. These numbers are taken globally. And if you look at globally at the plight of women worldwide, like the difference in leisure time starts differentiating between the genders as early as age 4. So as early as age 4, women have less leisure time than men. Girls have less leisure time than boys because of their gender, because of expectations that are placed upon them in terms of like housework and social responsibilities. So that leisure time starts cutting into all leisure activities. It's why, historically, leisure has been kind of like a thing that males have defined as a hobby industry. So for one, women are playing games that are just more mobile and that you can do anywhere because they don't have time to sit down for these larger swaths of hours. And I'm generalizing here. When I say they don't have time to sit down, what I mean is that in larger numbers, men are sitting down for large swaths of hours and playing these complex computer games, and women in larger numbers are playing mobile pick up anywhere and put down immediately because I need to do something else games because of this leisure time discrepancy. So that contributes to the statistical anomaly. Then you start to enter into the actual barriers, right? And most of these, I was reading an interesting study on gender differences in political participation that was saying that women, essentially, if you look at the like stock market, for example, you can find that clearly women are better estimators of risk. They're the top performers in terms of stock picking by a clear margin. Women are like fundamentally better at assessing risk in equities than men. And so they say this has to be a gender difference, and it turns out that it is. And so the way that this plays out in the political arena is women are more accurate at assessing the risk of winning or losing a political campaign, and they're less likely to take campaigns that they're not going to win. Whereas a man will more likely say like, oh yeah, like just have blind faith that they're going to win, even if there's a 70% chance for the incumbent or like a 99% chance for the incumbent. There's like, no, we got to try, throw themselves at the wall and waste their time. And women are more likely to, for a number of reasons, both this gender difference in terms of risk assessment and also just like because women have less opportunities, so they need to pay attention more to the ones that they do take. This is a statistical thing again. I'm not saying that like all women have less opportunities. I'm saying that in general, they're more keen about the ones that they do take. And so they're just less likely to be like, I'm going to spend 8 months of my life and thousands of dollars running a political campaign that is destined to failure for sure, based on this clear risk assessment. So when you look at professional esport, what do you see? You see 100% male participation, 0 female, and you think, this is not a risk that I'm willing to sink 3 years of my life trying to be a pro into, because I can assess that risk and say that I'd rather do something else with my time. So I think that's going on. And I think that that's backed up by gender different studies in other realms that could be applied to this. And then there's the whole recruiting thing, right? Talent scouting. So there was a study in Germany where they had all male orchestras, and they were like, well, men are just better at instruments. It's not a recruitment thing. And so they were like, okay, so you won't mind if we put women behind curtains and men behind curtains when they apply for your orchestras. And the conductor said no. And then magically 6 months later, there was like a 50-50 gender differential in top performers in orchestras. So it turns out they were just hiring men because they saw men and then they just heard better music when they saw them. But when you put them all behind curtains, they would pick the woman half the time. So I think that there's like a scouting problem here. Esports going to overcome this almost instantly once we get women into gaming houses, or once gaming houses die and we start having training facilities, because the ladder is blind, right? There's no selection till you get to the top. Like, nobody cares whether you're a female or a male when you're in an online avatar. It's irrelevant. And so we have a ton of tools to deal with that problem, all the way up until the pro team. And I think the pro teams will solve it almost instantly once we don't all live together in the same house as a way of competing.
Yeah, I mean that's another interesting topic altogether. I feel like I should shout out Giguri right now in Overwatch. She is an incredible off tank, and I love watching her play. Do you think we will see in the future men and women leagues in these sports, or
I think that would
continue?
I think that would be a real shame, because I think that esports has a very powerful opportunity to stand up in society and be a gender blind competitive arena where men and women can, for the first time, go against each other on like an equal turf that is impossible to do on the running field. It's impossible to do on the tennis field. Like, it's just impossible to do because of the discrepancy of testosterone. And I feel like esports has the capability of being this beautiful societal evolution where we go into having our very first like massive like sport competitive arena, which is gender blind and even disability blind in a way. Like, you don't have legs, no problem. So I think it would be much more awesome for humanity if we just let it play out, and we just let more and more women kind of make the attempt, and we just got more and more representation over time, and we solve some of these problems a little bit as we could, and we let the rest of them play out as we, evolved esport, and then it just became this amalgamated genderless sport. That'd be sweet, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, I think that would be awesome too. I want to return to your idea of, I think you wanted, one of your goals is or aspirations, I guess, is this idea of esports in youth and its potential role, I guess, in people's lives, a more integrated role, not just like, a thing nerds do in their basement or whatever that mental image is. Can you expand on that a little bit?
So when you look at the research over what it is in sport that develops youth, and by develop youth, I mean they develop a social skill or an emotional skill that they then are able to transfer into another domain, so that like they don't have to go pro in order for that soccer practice on the afternoon to have meaning in their life. It has transferable skills that you pick up and you carry elsewhere. It turns out it's not just the competitive arena that gives you that. It doesn't happen automatically, is what I'm trying to say. So you can go and you can do sport for your whole entire childhood and then end up in university and be worse off morally and in terms of social justice than a person who didn't do sport and was just like, a control study group from the standard population. And also the opposite can take place. You can do sport your entire youth and then you can end up higher than the average population. And when you cluster those two groups of people, when you cluster people who end up higher on those kind of maturity scales and lower, then you see that there's like differentiating factors in the leadership of those youth experiences. And it has to do with who was your captain, who was your coach. Was it an environment that taught values instead of cheating? Did they use the competitive environment to teach you skills and help you transfer them? Or did they just do sport and let the rampant competitive instincts of, young men and young women go crazy in like a Lord of the Flies kind of way? So you need the competitive stress, and then you just need leadership to make use of it in order to train kids to do amazing things. It's kind of like there's a statement by, I can't remember his name. It's a famous youth sport coach, and he said, somebody asked why he's a sport coach, and he said, or why does he have his kids do sport? And he said, it's easier to motivate a kid through a baseball game than a math class. Basically that like you can teach them about life by the thing that they're motivated by. So if they're motivated by esport and it's competitive and you get on stage and you need these competitive skills and you have to work with a team, then that means you can motivate the kids to improve themselves to do so. And so my aspiration is to let that develop naturally, as it is developing now in almost every major city on earth. There are local live leagues kind of taking over for youth, and to try to train the coaching level or the leadership level or the captaincy level with the skills necessary and the tools necessary to kind of teach these things to their teams.
Is there an even higher socioeconomic issue here than with traditional sports? Poor kid, is it harder for him to play law because he can't afford a computer?
I'm sure.
Is that one of the main barriers?
Well, I don't think it's a barrier in a lot of industrialized countries. I think it's a barrier in terms of being a worldwide movement. But if you look at the number of cell phones in the world now, and you look at the games and the esports that are coming out that are mobile first, I don't think that that'll be the case, in 20, 30 years.
Yeah. I mean, because I'm like a mid-20s professional at this point, and I still hear people saying, like, I can't afford a PC. They cite that as one of the main reasons that they, don't game. I mean, that could be kind of a cop-out. Maybe they just don't, they're allocating their funds to other things. But I can just imagine, kids in Southside Chicago.
To be fair, they're kind of like beyond my target audience, looking at 10 to 14-year-olds here. So I think that we're looking at somebody who's maybe a couple of years older than your friend who can't afford a PC, and whether or not they're going to buy one for their kid 10 years after that. So hopefully by the time that your friend is like 45, he'll be able to afford a PC for his kid. That's kind of like
that's your target.
Yeah.
So you would encourage anybody out there, parents, to put their kids in sport for sure then?
Yeah, I would encourage
esports aside,
parents
just
to go into sport with their kid, because you don't want to rely on the system when we know so much that it's literally the mentorship that is in the system that determines the outcome. And well, first it's the peer group. That's the number one causal related factor to like whether or not you succeed in a lot of these in academics, in school, whether it's your peer group, and in sport as well. But then in sport, for the transferable skill development, it's the mentorship and the leadership available. So you should be going through the sport journey with your kid if you want to make sure 100% that it's going to like improve their life instead of hurt their life, because there's a lot of abuse in sport. I mean, you get it. Let me put it this way. How many times a year or a month do you get faced with reality coming up and saying like, you are insufficient to this task and you are a failure and you have to accept that, and there is no way or no excuse to get around it? It's like not very many times a year that we find ourselves in like an average job or relationship faced with these kind of things. But in sport, it's like every single game, you are tested, and then objective reality comes up and says either you were sufficient for this task or you were insufficient for this task. There's a winner and a loser, period. And so those trials are the things that kind of like test a person's acceptance of, whether or not they can accept the reality is telling them that they're insufficient, and what they do about it afterwards is, that adaptation and that growth. So I think that that's a ripe opportunity for parenting. And I don't think that you want to throw your kid into that arena without some sort of mentorship, or at least making sure that there's a mentor there to take care of them when you're not.
Yeah. So
and I
sport
hate
is
to guilt parents. I hate to guilt, because like I am a parent now. I have 4 kids, and I hate to guilt all of the parents out there into this. But I just want to warn you, like, unless you trust your kids' coaches, attend their practice once or twice and just watch what's happening, so you can talk to them at home afterwards about it.
So sport is essentially a piece of, when done right, educational technology for our society.
And when done wrong, it's like Lord of the Flies, man. I mean, if you've read that book, you could tell it's just basically a peewee, baseball game gone mad with no parents around.
I think that's about it for our time, Weldon. Can you tell the people out there how they can get in touch with you, how they can follow your work?
Yeah, I think that the most active network I'm on right now is Twitch. Twitch.tv/mindgamesweldon. It's my live stream, and I run a daily talk show every single day, 6:30 p.m. LA time, and that's kind of like my main thing. It's kind of like Dr. Phil for high performance. Only I don't respect Dr. Phil very much, so I just don't know of any other way of describing it.
Yeah, no, I think that's
not
accurate.
Oprah, because it's a little less touchy-feely than Oprah. It's more like we're doing high performance here, so let's figure out how to perform. But
yeah, and you're on Twitter, and I think I actually got introduced to you from YouTube, I think. Do you put everything on YouTube, or?
I put everything on YouTube. Yep.
Cool. One last thing. Are you a proponent of mindfulness meditation?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I do it with all of my teams, and it's kind of sad because when I was doing my studies, it didn't come up at all. When I graduated, I found out that there's actually a ton of research in sports psychology on mindfulness, and that it's much more effective than pretty much any other psychological skills training you can do. And so I was like, well, why didn't my professors, teach me about this? And I realized there's this massive political, cultural shift that's kind of happening within the research world as mindfulness is disrupting a lot of industries in psychology. Well, first was educational psychology, and now it's coming into sport as well. But every player I can convince to sit down and meditate sits down and meditates now. And
do you give them an app, or do you guide them yourselves, or what is the best intro?
I give them an app. I have my own app, mindgames.gg/MAC. That's my online course for it. There's Headspace is great because they have a free 10 session thing you can do. Tara Brach has a website. Her name is hard to spell. TaraBrach. She has a website that is tons of free guided meditations in mindfulness. Sharon Salzberg has a number of guided meditations that are amazing. I mean, you can find them anywhere. You can download the Wish app. Not the Wish app. That's the shopping one.
Yeah.
What is the there's a one.
I use Headspace. There's a couple though. There's
one that's 10 times the size of Headspace. Surprisingly,
really?
When I learned about it, I've got it on my phone right here. It's a lot of Calm. That's it.
Calm. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of, the Headspace, right? It grew up in the business space, and it was pushed by all of these business podcasts, and so everything related to podcasting and the kind of the businessy world, everybody thinks that it's this big thing. But then there's just quietly, there's this other app over there that's just used by a ton of women, and it's not talked about really, but they just all use it, and they found it on Facebook because they're just doing Facebook marketing, and so it's it's 10 times the user base. But anyway, I don't know what the state is now, but that's what it was when I looked at it a couple of years ago, and I thought that was pretty funny. It's the same with Pinterest, right? We talk about all these massive social media platforms, and then here's Pinterest on the side quietly, making millions of dollars for people as a sales platform, but it's mostly for selling stuff to women.
Yeah,
it's kind of hidden. It's not in the discourse, it's not on TechCrunch, it's not on all these blogs and stuff. So
yeah. Well, shout out to Headspace. That's what I use.
Shout out to Headspace. Shout out to Calm. Let's see. Here's all of them. Calm, Pacifica, Aura, 7 Cups, Mindfulness, Mindfulness, Simple Habit, Joyable, Headspace, and Inscape. Now you have no excuse. Those are all free apps.
Guys, go out and do that. And then if you have, I guess if you're an esports athlete, consider the MAC program.
Yeah, or an athlete in general. It's
just for athletes. Excuse me.
Yeah, or a high performer. I think that there's a lot of things now that I'm realizing are covered under performance. The feedback I get from the program comes from managers, students, parents. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm a software engineer, and it's pretty integral to my work.
Right.
So, yeah.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much, Weldon. Really appreciate it. Hey, thank you for listening to the podcast. Just wanted to make a few announcements before you go. First off, if you aren't subscribed to the Synthetic Native YouTube, please do that. Other than that, we're on Instagram, Twitter. We even have a subreddit, so check all those out. Any comments or feedback on the podcast are always really, really appreciated. One important announcement, I'm going to be committing to releasing a podcast every Sunday from now on. So, I might miss something. I might miss a Sunday, occasionally because of real life responsibilities, but for the most part, I want to deliver one a week. So I hope that is something that you'll look forward to. And I hope you enjoyed today's podcast, and I will talk to you later.